You think you know everything about Hollywood's golden couple, but what if I told you that behind those famous smiles and legendary laughs on I Love Lucy, there was a secret so shocking that it stayed buried for 3 decades? Desi Arnaz, the charismatic Cuban bandleader who made millions fall in love with Lucy, was living a double life that would make even the best scriptwriters blush. And Lucy, she knew more than she ever let on. This isn't just another celebrity scandal. This is a story of betrayal, addiction, and secrets that Hollywood's most powerful kept locked away until death forced the truth into the light. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about America's favorite TV couple. It was 1951, and television was about to change forever. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz weren't just creating a sitcom, they were building an empire. But while America watched Lucy Ricardo fumble through hilarious schemes every Monday night, behind the cameras at Desilu Studios, Desi Arnaz was constructing an elaborate facade that would crumble only after his death. The man who revolutionized television production, who invented the multi-camera setup we still use today, who built one of the most powerful studios in Hollywood, was simultaneously destroying himself and everyone around him in ways the public could never imagine. Let's go back to the beginning, to Cuba in 1917, where Desiderio Alberto Arnaz y de Archer III was born into unimaginable wealth. His father was the mayor of Santiago, his family owned 3 ranches, a yacht, and a mansion with its own private island. Young Desi literally had the world at his feet. But in 1933, everything collapsed. The Cuban Revolution stripped his family of everything: their wealth, their status, their homeland. At 16, Desi found himself in Miami, broke, unable to speak English, cleaning canary cages for pennies. That trauma, that sudden fall from paradise to poverty, created something dark inside him. A desperate need to prove himself, to grab every pleasure life offered because it could all disappear tomorrow. By the time he met Lucille Ball on the set of Too Many Girls in 1940, Desi had already developed the charm and the demons that would define his life. Lucy was 6 years older, already an established actress, a redhead with ice blue eyes and a work ethic forged through years of struggle. Desi was 23, impossibly handsome, with that accent that made women weak and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Their chemistry was explosive, dangerous, immediate. They eloped after just 6 months, and from that moment, their relationship became a battlefield disguised as a romance. What America saw was Lucy and Ricky Ricardo, the wacky redhead and her hot-tempered but loving Cuban husband, navigating married life in a New York apartment. What they didn't see was Lucille Ball fighting to save her career by insisting her real husband play her TV husband, or the network executives who said no American audience would accept an interracial marriage on television. They didn't see Desi negotiating brilliantly to own the show themselves, creating Desilu Productions, and becoming the first interracial couple to run a major Hollywood studio. And they definitely didn't see what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. The double life began almost immediately. While I Love Lucy became the most watched show in America, with 71% of television sets tuning in at its peak, Desi started building his secret world. The first layer was the drinking. It started as social, then became necessary, then became constant. By the 3rd season, everyone on set knew that mornings were good Desi time. He could remember lines, hit marks, perform brilliantly. But after lunch, the flask came out, and by evening, he was barely functional. Lucy would cover for him, running lines repeatedly, adjusting scenes, doing extra takes when he fumbled. She became expert at making it look like everything was fine. But the alcohol was just the gateway to darker secrets. Desi had grown up in a culture where powerful men kept mistresses openly, where masculinity was measured by conquest, and he never abandoned those values. The affairs started small, a script girl here, a dancer there. Then they became systematic. He kept an apartment in town, separate from their Beverly Hills home, ostensibly for late work nights. Lucy knew. How could she not? But she had 2 children, a career that depended on their public image, and a belief that she could fix him, change him, love him enough to make him stop. The studios knew too. CBS knew. The sponsors knew. And they all conspired to keep it quiet because I Love Lucy was worth $40 million a year, more than any other show on television. So when Desi would disappear for 3-day benders in Las Vegas, or when showgirls would mysteriously appear on the Desilu payroll, everyone looked the other way. Hollywood's publicity machine, perfected during the Golden Age, went into overdrive. Magazine articles gushed about their perfect marriage. Photos showed them playing with little Lucy and Desi Jr., the picture of domestic bliss. And the American public bought every word. But Desi's double life went beyond just affairs. By the mid-50s, he had developed a whole separate existence. He surrounded himself with enablers, musicians from his band days, Cuban expatriates, Hollywood hangers-on who would facilitate his desires without judgment. There were regular poker games that lasted 72 hours, fueled by alcohol and eventually cocaine. There were trips to Havana before Castro, where Desi would reconnect with the culture of his youth and indulge in excesses that would have destroyed his career if photographed. There were investments in nightclubs where he was part owner and permanent VIP, places where women were always available and discretion was guaranteed. What made it all sustainable was Desi's genuine genius. Despite the chaos of his personal life, he revolutionized television production. He invented the 3-camera technique that allowed sitcoms to be filmed like movies. He pioneered the concept of reruns, which made them millions. He built Desilu into a powerhouse that produced not just ILoveLucy but also The Untouchables, Star Trek, and dozens of other shows. He was making deals, signing contracts, expanding the empire, all while maintaining his secret life. It was as if there were two Desis, the brilliant businessman and producer who showed up sober and sharp to meetings, and the self-destructive addict who couldn't go 12 hours without a drink. Lucy tried everything. She threatened divorce repeatedly. They actually divorced in 1960, though they'd been functionally separated for years before that. She staged interventions with doctors and therapists. She tried controlling his schedule, monitoring his whereabouts, even hiring private investigators to document his affairs, thinking evidence might shock him into change. Nothing worked. Desi's childhood trauma, his cultural conditioning, his addictive personality, and the enablers surrounding him created a perfect storm that no amount of love or logic could penetrate. The children suffered most. Little Lucy and Desi Jr. grew up in a house where mom was always working or crying, where dad was either absent or drunk, where the television showed a happy family that bore no resemblance to their reality. Young Desi Jr. would later develop his own addiction problems, repeating his father's patterns. Lucy would spend decades in therapy, trying to reconcile the father she loved with the man who destroyed her mother. And then there were the women. So many women. Chorus girls, starlets, showgirls, prostitutes, and even some legitimate actresses whose names were kept out of the press through expensive payoffs and legal threats. Desi didn't just have affairs. He had relationships, some lasting months or even years. He set women up in apartments, gave them jewelry, made promises he never intended to keep. Some of them genuinely loved him, seeing the charming, wounded man beneath the addiction. Others were simply using him for money and connections. He didn't seem to care which was which. One affair, never publicly confirmed until decades later, was with a dancer named Barbara Eden, years before she became famous as Jeannie. Another was with a Cuban singer who bore a striking resemblance to Lucy, suggesting that even in his betrayals, Desi was trying to recreate what he was destroying at home. There were rumors of an illegitimate child in Mexico, of hush money paid to avoid a paternity suit, of at least 2 abortions arranged and paid for through intermediaries. None of this could be proven during his lifetime because Desi's lawyers and the studio's fixers were that good. But the double life exacted its toll. By 1960, when ILoveLucy ended its run as the #1 show in America, Desi looked 20 years older than his actual age. The drinking had bloated his face, the stress had turned his hair white, the lifestyle had given him an ulcer that nearly killed him. Lucy finally divorced him that year, unable to watch him destroy himself any longer. In court documents, she cited his cruelty and habitual drunkenness, but even then, she protected him by not revealing the full extent of his infidelities and addictions. After the divorce, you'd think Desi might have reformed, that losing Lucy would shock him into sobriety. Instead, the double life became his only life. He married Edith Mack Hirsch, a woman who accepted his drinking and his wandering because she wanted the lifestyle and status that came with being Mrs. Desi Arnaz. He continued running Desilu for a few more years but eventually sold it to Lucy for $17 million, a transaction that must have burned his Latin pride but was necessary because his addictions had made him unreliable. Desi moved to Del Mar, where he built a horse breeding ranch that gave him a legitimate cover for his continued excesses. The ranch became party central for aging Hollywood players, musicians, and a rotating cast of younger women attracted to his money and fading fame. He would disappear for weeks, emerging bloated and exhausted, then clean himself up enough to see his children or handle business, only to vanish again into the bottle and the bedroom. The truly shocking part of the double life was how well he maintained the public facade. In interviews, he remained charming, funny, self-deprecating about his accent and his temper, always praising Lucy as the genius behind their success. When ILoveLucy went into eternal syndication and made them both wealthy beyond measure, Desi played the gracious ex-husband, attending family events, walking daughter Lucy down the aisle at her wedding, being Grandpa Desi to the grandchildren. Only those closest to him knew that between these public appearances, he was drowning. In 1976, Desi published his autobiography, a book, where he admitted some of his failures, the drinking, the temper, losing Lucy. But even then, he sanitized the story, making his affairs sound like minor indiscretions rather than the systematic betrayal they were. He portrayed himself as a flawed but ultimately decent man who had made mistakes. Critics praised the book for its honesty, not realizing they were reading a carefully constructed version of the truth, one final performance from a master showman. The secrets might have died with him when lung cancer finally caught up to his decades of smoking and drinking in 1986. Lucy was with him at the end, holding his hand, their love surviving what their marriage could not. He died at 69, looking 90, his body destroyed by the double life. The obituaries celebrated his genius, his contributions to television, his rags-to-riches story. They mentioned the divorce but framed it as a tragic incompatibility between two talented people. Hollywood turned out for a funeral that celebrated the public Desi while carefully avoiding the private one. But then came the memoirs. First, daughter Lucille Arnaz gave interviews in the 90s, carefully revealing more about her father's alcoholism and its impact on the family. Then Lucille's autobiography, published posthumously, pulled back the curtain a bit more, discussing the pain of the affairs and the impossibility of competing with Desi's addictions. Then biographies started appearing, written by people who had worked at Desilu, who had been in Desi's inner circle, who finally felt free to talk now that the principals were dead. Desi Jr. opened up in interviews about growing up with an alcoholic father, about the women who would call the house looking for Desi Sr., about finding his father passed out in places no child should see their parent. He talked about his own struggles with addiction, how he was repeating his father's patterns until he finally got sober. Each revelation added another piece to the puzzle, showing just how extensive the double life had been. The most shocking revelations came from a 2011 biography that included interviews with some of the women Desi had been involved with, those who were still alive and willing to talk. They painted a picture of a man who was simultaneously generous and selfish, charming and cruel, loving and manipulative. One woman, a former dancer at the Tropicana, described a year-long affair where Desi would fly her to wherever he was filming or doing business, set her up in hotels, promised to leave Lucy, then disappear for months without contact. When she finally confronted him, he simply moved on to someone else. Another revelation involved Desi's gambling, something he had always downplayed. It turned out he had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in Las Vegas and Cuba, sometimes in single nights, debts that had to be quietly paid by the studio to avoid mob complications. There were also suggestions of bisexual encounters, though these were only hinted at and never confirmed, the one secret perhaps too scandalous even for posthumous revelation. What emerged from all these disclosures was the portrait of a profoundly damaged man. The childhood trauma of losing everything, the pressure of being a Latino in a racist industry, the imposter syndrome of the poor immigrant who made it big but never believed he deserved it, all of this fed the addictions and the compulsive womanizing. Desi was trying to fill a hole inside himself that couldn't be filled, destroying the one person who genuinely loved him in the process. Lucy's pain was retroactively understood in a new light. For years, she had been portrayed as the difficult one, the perfectionist who was hard to work with, the control freak who drove Desi away. But as the truth emerged, people realized she had been fighting to hold everything together. The show, the studio, the marriage, the family, while Desi systematically dismantled it all. She had been protecting him, covering for him, enabling him, all while playing the happy housewife on television and the tough executive in boardrooms. The double life also had a broader impact on how we understand Golden Age Hollywood. Desi and Lucille's story became emblematic of how the studio system protected stars at all costs, how publicists and lawyers worked overtime to maintain illusions, how the American public was fed carefully crafted narratives that bore little resemblance to reality. It raised questions about all those perfect Hollywood couples from that era. How many others were living double lives that we still don't know about? For 30 years, Desi Arnaz maintained his double life so successfully that even people who worked with him daily didn't know the full extent of his secrets. The drinking they saw, the occasional affair they heard rumors about, these were just the tip of an iceberg that extended far deeper and darker than anyone imagined. He compartmentalized brilliantly, keeping his different worlds separate, making sure the people in one sphere never fully understood what happened in the others. The tragedy is that none of it made him happy. Despite all the women, all the drinking, all the parties and indulgences, Desi was fundamentally miserable. He knew what he was destroying. In sober moments, he would apologize to Lucy, promise to change, weep over the damage he was doing to his children. But addiction and compulsion don't respond to good intentions, and Desi lacked either the tools or the will to seek real help. Therapy wasn't something Latino men of his generation did. Admitting weakness wasn't possible for someone who had built his identity on strength and confidence. Looking at old episodes of ILoveLucy now, knowing what we know, adds a haunting dimension to the comedy. When Lucy plots to get into Ricky's show, we see Lucille Ball fighting to be part of Desi's life. When Ricky loses his temper and rants in Spanish, we see the real anger that Desi carried. When they make up and the audience sighs with relief, we know that in real life, the makeup never lasted, the problems never got solved, the happy ending never came. The saddest part of the double life was how unnecessary it was. Desi had already beaten incredible odds. He had escaped Cuba with nothing and built an empire. He had overcome prejudice and created one of the most successful shows in television history. He had a wife who loved him, children who adored him, more money than he could spend. But the demons planted in that scared 16-year-old refugee never left him, and he spent his entire adult life running from them straight into the things that would destroy him. In his final years, after cancer diagnosis, Desi had moments of clarity and regret. He tried to rebuild relationships with his children, tried to explain to them why he had been the way he was, tried to apologize to Lucy for the pain he'd caused. She forgave him, as she always had, but forgiveness couldn't erase the decades of hurt. When he died with her beside him, it was both a romantic final scene and a tragic reminder of what might have been if he had chosen differently. Today, ILoveLucy remains one of the most beloved shows in television history, still airing in syndication, still making people laugh 70 years after it premiered. Desi and Lucille's professional legacy is secure, they changed television forever. But the personal legacy is more complicated. It's a cautionary tale about addiction, about the price of fame, about how childhood trauma can echo through an entire lifetime, about how we construct public personas that hide private agonies. The double life of Desi Arnaz wasn't unique. Hollywood has always been full of people living contradictions, presenting polished images while falling apart behind closed doors. But his story is particularly poignant because the contrast was so extreme. The man who gave America its image of married life was destroying his own marriage. The family man on television was neglecting his real family. The successful businessman was sabotaging his success with every drink and every affair. The immigrant success story was being eaten alive by the very demons he thought he had escaped when he left Cuba. For those 30 years, from 1951 to 1981, Desi maintained the performance of a lifetime. Not his performance as Ricky Ricardo, but his performance as Desi Arnaz, successful producer and family man. Only after his death did the mask fully slip, revealing the struggling addict and compulsive womanizer beneath. It took memoirs and biographies and interviews with people who had stayed silent out of loyalty or fear to finally assemble the complete picture. What drove him? Psychologists who have analyzed his life posthumously suggest complex trauma from his childhood displacement, Cultural factors around masculinity and infidelity, genetic predisposition to addiction, and the unique pressures of being a Latino man in power during an era of intense racism. Others point to simple moral failure, arguing that plenty of people have trauma without becoming serial adulterers and alcoholics. The truth probably contains elements of both. Desi was shaped by circumstances but also made choices, was both victim and perpetrator, both sympathetic and culpable. The real tragedy, the one that makes this story more than just another celebrity scandal, is Lucy. She loved him genuinely, fought for him relentlessly, and paid an enormous price for both. She gave up years of her life trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved, trying to hold together something that was fundamentally broken. And she did it all while becoming one of the biggest stars in the world, proving that you can be professional and successful even while your personal life is disintegrating. That's the real double life, not just Desi's secret indulgences, but Lucy's secret pain, hidden behind impeccable comedic timing and that brilliant smile.